There are many social workers that don't do therapy, right? So it's good to separate the two. They're a bit different. It's so sad, and it's on the regular that people are unable to get the care that they need when they do. Okay, what about the companies that have made this addictive software? What role do they have to play, right? Where's the laws that regulate them? Now I'm realizing I think a lot more people than I've ever realized deal with burnout. A lot of people are turning to AI, ChatGPT, as their therapist. The goal of therapy is that you don't need a therapist. Interestingly enough, in these studies is that the most telling predictor of a person's success and how well they can heal from trauma, heal from whatever they're working in a therapy is...
When people think about social work, they specialize in so many different places, in schools, hospitals, community programs, and like everything you can imaginably think of. Mm-hmm. So what do you specifically specialize in, and what would a typical day look like for you?
You go see your doctor. Maybe you're feeling a little bit sad, a little anxious. The doctor does a quick screening. They're like, how sad and depressed are you? And based on that, if you score really high, they're like, whoa, we need to call in somebody, or you express that you want to do therapy, you want some healing, they'll call a person, and that's where I come in usually. I'm that kind of in-between person that's like, hey, I work with the doctor. Heard you're having a tough time. Let's talk about it. Here are your options. We have this therapy. We have this. You can go to here, there. Then I would refer them to different programs that offer those things for them. So not only am I saying like, here, go to these counties, but, oh, you need food. Here's a food shelter. You're having some difficulty with utilities. Here, SMUD does this utilities program. Check it out. If I have the time, I might even fill it out with them. It's kind of like this in-between person that refers, but also does treatment myself. So I also do short-term and long-term therapy. My youngest clients are often ages like 12 to ages 60 and 70 and above. It's a huge range.
You mentioned whenever they're at the doctor's, is that how you get the referral, or can it go to you directly?
Usually through the doctor. But there are times that people might show up to our department being like, I really need help. And it's like, all right, we're going to get you onto our caseload ASAP, Or sometimes they're seeing a psychiatrist. The psychiatrist sends a referral. So it kind of depends. But this, again, is the model that we had at our federally qualified health center in FQHC. These are generally the clinics. If you're on Medicaid, often these people are going to community clinics, FQHCs, which is where I had that work at.
What does the education path look like for someone that is getting into social work?
So the neat thing is that even though there is a bachelor's in social work, you don't need it. I will say, though, from my standpoint, multiple professors and people have told me that having my background in psychology has been very beneficial, because a lot of our work when we're in clinical social work is diagnoses. And with that background of psychology, I know a lot of diagnoses. That's a lot of my undergrad work was in that, as well as in research as well with UC Davis. So that really lends itself to being very helpful for a master's in social work, but it's not needed.
What is the difference between social worker and a therapist, or are they the same thing?
It's good to separate the two. They're a bit different. Social workers are people who've done their master's program in social work, and then they've gotten their approval from our licensing board to say, yay, you can go practice out there. And they'll do social work in whatever kind of capacity. So it could be case management, and then they never have to get their clinical work. You have to, in order to get your clinical work to become that therapist, you have to do those licensing hours, which you discussed with Johnny. It's those 3,000, as of recently, 3,000 hours of, training that you have to go through under a person that is licensed. So next level up. And once you get the okay, signatures on everything, then you can go the next step to get your license. And that's when you are by yourself practicing as a therapist. You can do that.
I don't think people really understand what case management means. So
Right.
Can you break down, like, what are the levels of case management? What is that?
The first level is called, I think, CCM. So it's like comprehensive. This kind of level of case management is more so a nurse is checking in. An RN, usually it's telehealth. So they're calling and being like, hey, how are you doing? Did you get to those appointments? I know that you were confused about this referral. I can do some phone calls for you in the background. They're a little more hands-off. They're kind of like doing the phone calls. They'll check in with you maybe every week, maybe every month. For people who need extra support, there's the next level up. So that's enhanced care management. Essentially, you're going with that person to these places. So they're like, oh, I don't have an ID for driving, or, oh, I don't have my public benefits. Got to go to the DHA. So we'll go together. And if they're struggling to ask the doctor questions or make sense of their diagnosis, we're there. We're like, hey, what about this? What about that? They're also doing these treatments. How does these interact? And they also follow up on the referrals. So it's very involved.
How do they give you consent? Because it's like medical information sometimes. So What does that process look like?
Generally, it depends on where you get this program. If you're getting this program through Medicaid, so through your health insurance, things are pretty well connected. So you actually don't need to sign any waivers, which is really nice because there's times where maybe I'll go to an appointment with a patient for the cardiologist or for whoever, their clinic, their primary care doctor. And we don't need to exchange all these, releases of information, have me on their documentation. They don't need it because I'm working with their health insurance and we're contracted with them. So that is a huge thing there, which makes things a lot easier. But if you are in a case management program that is outside of that, some people will do their own kind of case management, maybe from home, kind of thing, or like their own kind of business. Then yes, they're not contracted with the insurance. They probably will have to get some of those forms signed, which make it a little more tedious, but is also an option for people if they need it.
If someone is seeking help and doesn't know that they have these options available, they should ask their doctor?
Yes, their doctor or their health insurance. Their health insurance can probably also direct them. For example, I suggest all your listeners to be able to call their health insurance if they're needing that extra support. And they could be like, hey, do you guys offer any kind of case management of any kind? And they might say, oh, yes, we have ECM, we have CCM. Here we have these programs we can link you up to. That's awesome. So I'd say definitely start with your health insurance, see if they can pay for it before you start to do the research on your own.
For someone that might not know that they qualify for Medi-Cal or might be uninsured right now, where do they go to find that program and find out more to see if they can sign up?
Yeah, there are several different ways to go about this. So Department of Human Assistance, where your wife works, that's one option. They'll tell you about the programs there. But a lot of community health clinics actually will have their own set of teams that will help guide them. So they're like, oh, you're undocumented, maybe you can't pay. They talk about, hey, let's do sliding scale, or we can get you onto a health insurance, that's another option. So there's advocates in many health clinics that will be able to help people get onto these programs.
When people get onto the programs, do they ever experience any like common issues, especially in the Sacramento area?
You would think that having double coverage would be a benefit, like, great, I have someone there to catch me in case this one falls through. It actually makes billing sometimes more difficult, which is the worst part. So sometimes having both is not always better between Medicaid and Medicare. So sometimes you might have a clinic and maybe your next time you see your doctor or specialist is in 3 months, 4 months, 5 months. It's so sad, and it's on the regular that people are unable to get the care that they need when they do. So people are waiting insanely long times for their doctors, their specialists, their therapists, waiting for referrals to go through. Sometimes people really have the misconception that Medi-Cal, because it's free, they have it easy. They don't.
Where can people go to find advocacy group?
Usually within the clinic. So the clinic will have that group there. And these are people that will be like, hey, let's talk about if you want to see your doctor, let's do a sliding scale. You can pay as little as $5 for your appointment or $10, So they'll work with you. They're at the clinics, at the community clinics.
Gotcha.
So you would go to your local community clinic. You could probably find this by typing in Federally Qualified Health Center, so FQHC, and look at FQHCs near me or community clinics near me. And when you go to those clinics, there likely will be an advocate or group of people that can help you figure out and navigate that to get into it. Or if you can't get into Medi-Cal, as you said, then they can help steer them to other ways to be able to see their providers, therapists at a very low cost.
With kids, is there repeat problems that they're coming to you with?
Currently, my most recent demographic, it's of all ages. But at the time that I first started working with and only with kids was during the pandemic. And that was a time where the kids were on the computers, the difficulty with focusing, the struggles with social anxiety. Yeah, because maybe they lost a lot of friend groups or struggling to reconnect once they got back into school. More so and more so, parents are requesting, hey, can we get ADHD assessments for my kid? And just it floods in. We were having so many ADHD assessments. I did many of them myself, but it's very difficult because so much of it is sussing out, is this trauma? Is this ADHD? Is it both? Right? Because these can be impacting in so many different ways. So the poor focus, that's huge. The difficulty with making good decisions, very impulsive. How are you to say that maybe a 9-year-old, is it just being a 9-year-old, or do they actually have a serious problem?
From a policy perspective, do you think that there should be any laws or regulations to limit the amount of time people can spend on their phones?
What about the companies that have made this addictive software? What role do they have to play, right? Where's the laws that regulate them? Or can they just keep going on and doing the things they do? Once we start putting laws on the individual, whether it's with, criminalizing drugs or behaviors or whatever, We're not getting at the root of the problem. Sometimes our lives can be so difficult that we need that, right? Like we need that 1 hour of downtime in our beds, kind of scrolling. It's a decompressor, right?
If the manufacturers of the social media platforms could create that option. So in the settings, you could just set it to like, I want the normal algorithm addiction. That's fine.
Right.
You're in control. But if you want something that's less addicting and you just change the algorithm and then you could reset that to something that's less addicting and it's just more natural. So you could have 2 algorithms in the background. You let the user choose. Are we seeing any trends with adults?
Trauma is ultimately at the center of all of these things. And so I'm seeing a big focus and shift on that. And so I'm curious, our diagnosing manual as therapists, as social workers, I'm curious to see how that book's going to change. Like, right, how we define certain disorders, how is that going to change over time? Will it reflect our times? Will it reflect what we're seeing in our society? Or will it stay the same? Like, for example, at one point, Asperger's was considered separate from autism spectrum disorder. Now it's put all together. They're like, you can be high functioning autistic or less functioning autistic, but we're putting you all in the same group. So it's interesting to see those shifts. So I'm curious, not so much on I'm noticing some things here, but what people higher ups are noticing and how they're going to change things, because that's going to be a game changer for all social workers, therapists, once that next DSM comes out. So we'll see.
What would be some of the techniques that you deploy to kind of help people uncover what that trauma is and how to recover from that trauma?
The most telling predictor of a person's success and how well they can heal from trauma, heal from whatever they're working in a therapy, is the relationship with their therapist. The rapport and that relationship is essential. And it seems simple, right? It seems like just get along with your therapist. It seems so simple, but it's the most telling thing because you're building this trust and this relationship with this person. You're making a safe space where you can open up to this person. That's where the healing begins, when you can trust and talk to this person. So if you can't trust your therapist, you're feeling uncomfortable, you don't like the vibes, listen to that, because I think people really underestimate. They're like, I don't like my therapist, but I'm going to stick with them because I need it, No, you need to find a therapist you jive with, because that is essential in the healing process.
Well, how do you build that trust?
The complex answer is part of that is that not one therapist work with everybody. And that's okay. Even with whatever techniques I use, maybe I'm too energetic, right? There's some therapists that are more chill. Every therapist has their kind of different temperaments, personalities that work better with other people than others. Sometimes it's harder to open up to somebody if the provider has something that reminds you of someone you don't like. Whether it's your mom, your dad, they look like that neighbor that you don't like, or they have that tendency that just you can't stand, that pet peeve. That makes it a lot harder to connect with that therapist, even with their best, rapport building, relationship building skills. But once you are in that position, throw out my own agenda, throw out my own plans. If I go in there with my idea of how to heal you, instead of being like, okay, like open to you. You are the expert in your life. Let me go what works best with you. It's a lot better approach. I see a lot more movement in the person than having my own ideals, my own motives. This is how I heal you.
Do you see a technique that usually comes up more consistently that someone that's just getting into therapy is like, oh, okay, let me make sure I have that in my toolbox so I can use it if it comes up?
Ultimately, which I think is really neat, is asking the person first. Instead of being like, here are my ideas of how you can heal, some coping skills, be like, hey, what do you do when you're struggling? What do you already do? And oftentimes I find maybe some people have some solid skills for like when they're a little upset or when they're really upset, but they have nothing to help them in the in-between. I'm like, great, let's build on that area. What about this? What about that? And then try it, make it your own, right? Some people think, breathing has to be done a certain way. That meditation has to be done a certain way. No, make it your own. That's how it's going to stay and click.
Does the personality assessments, the strength finders assessments, like, do you guys do any of that personality discovery in some of your sessions?
I love that you do that. And I think, yes, I don't necessarily, hand out personality tests as much as I love them myself. But what it sounds like you're doing is you're trying to have that person build an understanding of themselves, which sometimes people don't have at all.
Right.
People go through their entire life on survival mode, have no sense of self, no idea who they are. Their identity is only what other people have told them to be. What you're doing is building an introspection, like, I'm like this. I actually really need to talk to people, or no, I really need my alone time, right? Whether you're doing personality tests or stress responses, you're helping them build a sense of themselves so that when we get to the coping skills, they understand what better works with them. So if you're telling somebody who's an introvert, like, okay, go to that nightclub, go to the party, every Wednesday, that's not going to be a good coping skill for that introvert, right? So I think, as you said, I love that you're doing that, and that's a great place to start on.
Was there anything that the textbooks could have never prepared you for when you got into the field?
I'd say the most important thing that school never prepared me for was the burnout. There's secondary trauma. You learn someone else's trauma and it sticks with you and you replicate trauma symptoms. There's also things called vicarious trauma. So the way that you see the world is actually changed. And there's also something called compassion fatigue. They're so tired of helping. It's taking a big toll on them. That's another aspect of burnout. And a lot of the causes of those is what's called, we call it moral injury. Now I'm realizing I think a lot more people than I've ever realized deal with burnout on a massive, massive level.
What about the vicarious trauma? I think that's what you called it.
Mm-hmm.
That one, like, I will not watch scary movies. I hate watching like people jumping off a cliff, anything with suicide. Like, I will not be able to sleep. I can't get those thoughts out of my brain. I can't get the images out of my brain.
Yes.
I will, if there's a ghost, scary stuff like that, like I can watch it. Don't get me wrong. But if I had a choice, I would definitely not watch it because I know like the next day I'm going to start thinking I'm seeing things. I'm like, is that a ghost? Is that this? Is that this? So I will avoid it. But then I know some people that just love scary movies. I'm like, how are we so polarly different? Am I the weird one or are they the weird one?
I know. This is a fascinating question I thought about time and time again. People who've gone through intense, terrible things but love horror, right? And I'm like, that doesn't make sense. Isn't that triggering?
Right.
I would love to hear research about that. I'm fascinated. So if anybody has any kind of experience with that, I would love to know why. So much of like when people think of people who are burned out, they look at the individual. They're like, oh, that person's so rude. They're lazy. They don't care. But they don't think about the environments that made them that way, that help contribute maybe even to that, like the moral injury, having these workplaces that have no culture, or they, as you said, they shoot down ideas, things like that. Like, let's think about that. So I love that these terms, moral injury, it shifts the focus from the individual saying, you're bad, you're not doing your job well enough, to like, let's consider the environments. Let's consider management. Let's consider the policies that your workplace has set in place and maybe the workloads, and maybe that's contributing. Wow. What a concept, right?
Yeah, it's so easy to just point the finger at someone because you're seeing the end result, the output. But then you oftentimes miss the inputs that led to that output. What are some of the misconceptions about social workers, or are there any at all?
Yes, I would say the biggest thing people think of social workers, you look in movies or you hear historically in some communities, like, oh, they take away kids. But the nice thing is that CPS also provides resources. They don't jump straight to trying to take away kids. The goal of CPS, goal of the social workers, is to help provide resources and help your family get to a sustainable point where you don't need social workers anymore. Your family can stay together. That's the goal. Family stays together. Those systems stay intact and they stay strong.
So does nutrition and diet and water and sleep really play a big factor into mental health and trauma?
It's actually a big part of my ADHD assessments when I work with kids. It's an extensive list of questions we have about family history, environments, interactions with parents and children, and the food. The food is one question I have to ask. I'm like, what foods are they eating at home? Are they having sodas? Do they have these certain dyes in them? Are they having caffeine? Like, how much caffeine? I think time and time again, people, like when people are seeing whether it's a child or adults in therapy, they think, oh, substances like, meth, heroin. Substances include coffee and caffeinated beverages. Wow. And that has a massive impact on anxiety and things of that nature, right? So yeah, I think that needs to be looked at a little more, is what are we having in our diets that are impacting our mental health? Because that's huge.
You've been in this field for a while now. So for the next generation of social workers, what advice would you give them? Because
of what we discussed about burnout, I'm going to say self-care is not only something you should do, but essential. It should be a regular part of your routine. Whether your self-care, right, is to, people think, baths and things like that, but maybe sometimes it's actually getting the laundry done. You don't want to get it done. You get it done to save yourself some peace of mind. With that burnout, the difficulty of the work-life balance sometimes with our work environments and things like that, it's so important to stand up for yourself and be like, I don't like this system, or I need more breaks for myself. Because ultimately that will make you feel more proud of your work because you're showing up to work instead of exhausted and no empathy. You're more refreshed. You're showing up and you're probably doing better work. You're probably more focused, having good relationships with people, and probably more proud of what you do at the end of the day. So I'm definitely going to advocate for self-care is essential.
What quality do you think someone needs to have to be a successful social worker?
Being reflective, introspective, being able to, at times in therapy, maybe realize like, oh man, like I worked with 10 clients today. I'm exhausted, calling yourself out on that. Having the time and energy to be able to say, actually, this is too much for me. My body's saying something, my mind's racing, I need to take some break for myself. So being able to do that is essential, right? Because we talked about earlier how that we call it transference. I didn't say the name earlier, but when like a person, like a client looks at the therapist and they're like, oh, you remind me of that person I don't like. The same thing happens with therapists themselves. So therapists will look at the clients and be like, oh, you remind me of this person I don't like too. It goes both ways. And so being able to check in with yourself, maybe you have a client that you work with that you're like, oh man, that took a lot out of me. They reminded me of my grandma, oh, that was hard. You need to check in with yourself.
So if you could go back to your first year when you were first starting out, is there any advice that you would give yourself?
Pretty much the things that I mentioned, essentially, like having more of that downtime, this self-care and reflection, because I didn't realize until much later that I was actually coming home I gave so much to my clients, right? You go into the field, you're so excited. You're like, I want to give them all these things. And then you come out at the end of the day with nothing to give to your partner, maybe even a little irritable, a little empty, even. And that shows up in the home environment. But again, that self-care was so essential because that affected me in that relationship with my friendships. I let my hobbies go, essential things that I need to survive and for it to be sustainable. So I would tell that version of myself, that Kim from, I guess, 2021, like, hey, like, don't take on that massive client load. Like, I know you have that passion, that energy. That's awesome. Save some energy for when you get home.
With the ChatGPTs, with the Perplexities, Claudes, and so on and so forth, how is that impacting social work, if at all? Is there anything that we should be concerned about?
Therapy it's hard to access, unfortunately. So a lot of people are turning to AI, ChatGPT, as their therapist. Like, hey, should I do this? Should I not do that, right? And it gets into a very fuzzy area because ChatGPT is really good at validating. So you're like, yeah, I think I should, do this wild behavior every day and it's going to make you feel better. ChatGPT is like, yes, do it. Or you're like, no, actually, I changed my mind. I'm going to do this instead. ChatGPT is like, fantastic, great. So very validating, but it's not good for so many situations. There's been situations where people with schizophrenia, or they'll say, or they'll have a certain delusion, and then it will only validate and build on that, and that's not good either. Therapists need to be there to be able to be like, whoa, I'm not going to build, I'm not going to validate and say that's true.
Is that something that could potentially backfire where we start having relationships with AI instead of with one another?
I can imagine so. I don't know for sure, but I can imagine that would be something pretty intense. I always had the thought that I'm like, oh man, if my son, my 1-year-olds maybe got into a relationship with a machine or a computer, right? If that was normalized in 10, 20 years, I'd struggle with that. That would be really hard. So at the end, I think in an unfortunate way, like social work and therapy especially, it's hard to replace. You can't replace the human connection. Like, unfortunately, therapy will always be around. And I say unfortunately because ideally, we all are mentally healthy. Nobody needs therapists. The goal of therapy is that you don't need a therapist. Like, you work with them and it's short term. That is the hope. But unfortunately, we have such a big need out there. We're gonna need therapists. We're gonna need them for sure.
Are there any topics that we haven't covered that we should have?
What things you can get from Medicaid and Medi-Cal that are free and covered by insurance. If you get certain referrals, they have free transportation to your appointments, to and from. And whether you're able to walk, whether you need a wheelchair, whatever, if you need oxygen, they will find a way to get you to your appointments. If you have certain health conditions, you actually can get a free chef at home and cook meals in your home. They will bring and buy all the ingredients for free, bring it to your home, and they will even teach you how to make those dishes yourself. Then another option is through the Medically Tailored Meals program, just have meals delivered to your door. They're made by local groups like Mom's Meals or other groups, Burgess Brothers. And of course, all the other things like you can get physical therapy, pelvic floor therapy.
Oh, okay.
They do provide gender affirming care, so hormones, as well as if you want surgeries for yourself. And this is only the case for Medi-Cal. If you hop to other health insurances, they will not pay for all of it.
How do you find work-life balance?
I'd say finding a community. So I found my communities in the salsa community So I'm very involved with like salsa, Latin dance, bachata, that kind of area. I know all the local kind of places and I run into those people all the time. So I found a cool community there in Sacramento. My other community is the LGBTQ community. So there's a lot of like at the Gender Health Center where Johnny also worked at for a bit. They have awesome like community groups, support groups. So again, building communities there. If I find that my thoughts are too loud or I feel like there's too much going on, I just take things out, right? Because the tendency can be distract. Do nothing, or immerse yourself into all these crazy things. But the important thing is to slow down, turn things off, get your phone away, go outside, take a walk. It's in these boring things that we find that our thoughts need to talk. They need to have space, having that downtime for your brain, and drink water. People want to think that therapy is the solution for healing. It's not, right? It's not just therapy. There are so many other ways to heal. A lot of people actually have a lot of ways that they heal themselves, whether in a maybe skillful way or less skillful way, right? Alcohol you could use to cope, but it's not so skillful, right? So I think everybody has, those ways to deal with things. I think it's making sure that you find your healers in your community. This can be your local, right? If you're religious, your local shaman, your pastor, whoever's at your temple or wherever. Good role models, people that, you can connect with, trust. Best friend even, people that you trust, those are the healers in the community, is being able to figure out who those people are and stay connected to them. Because again, as much as I want to say like, yes, therapy is good, therapists are good, not all therapists are good. And there's so many ways to heal, right? There's so many things outside of what we consider in our very Western traditions, all these different things that these different countries and different people and groups of people do to heal on their own.
For people that want to connect with you in the future, as you eventually open up your practice,
yes,
how would they be able to search for you and get connected?
Good question. So I don't have an Instagram or social media or email yet at this time, but you can find me once I open up that private practice. I will do ideally in person. So if you guys want to see me in person, that's awesome. I'm sorry, I won't be doing telehealth, but the way you can find me is just typing in Kimberly Schuster. So as it shows up on your screen, but for the podcast listeners, I'll spell it Kimberly. Schuster is spelled SCHUSTER. Kimberly Schuster, and then LCSW, California. You'll find me there and you'll find my practice, details about that, how to find me, what I'll be working on at that time. And I would love to connect with your listeners. So yeah.
Well, Kim, thank you for walking us through the programs, the challenges, and the recovery journey, kind of how that all plays out. And, it's really clear that social work is not just about therapy. It's about navigating those complex systems, helping people access what they need and providing hope where it's needed the most.
Yes.
So thank you so much. And thank you all for joining us on this episode of the Key Concepts podcast. We'll catch you on the next one. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Corey.
Thank you.